The Christ candle is lit on this fine morning. A simple but powerful symbol of presence, of seeing things in a different light, and of being on a path that needs light for us to follow. And as we walk the path of faith, daily, on land that is sacred, place of gathering and source of food and shelter and spiritual connection for many indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. Over many thousands of years, we're learning to respect the long history of stewardship and relationship with the land and its creatures that is shared among the Huron-Wendat, the Petun, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. We have a long way to go, but we are working to learn how to live in right relations with them and with the land. Greetings on this fourth Sunday in August, and welcome to Bloor Street, Trinity-St. Paul's, and St. Matthew's United Churches faith communities gathered together. It's good to have you here as we come together with words and music and time for quiet and reflection. In these Sundays in August, we have been experimenting just the tiniest bit with how we shape our morning worship experience, somewhat inspired by the form of podcasts that many of us download and listen to as we go on walks and do the dishes and other things. And our focus has been on stories, how we tell stories and whose stories get told, how to capture people's attention in a world that is crammed with storylines, and why it's important to consider who is telling the stories around us. The universe is made of stories, not of atoms, the poet Muriel Rukeyser wrote in 1968. And we humans love stories. We're story writers as we create our lives, and we need to be capable of shaping our stories with awareness and meaning, and to understand how our stories change over time, over the course of our lives, how we begin to tell them bit by bit a little differently, how the stories of our faith communities have changed profoundly within our own lifetime. The world desperately needs people who can tell stories that are beyond what is right before us in that moment, but that help us to perceive the patterns and find the deep undercurrents of meaning and purpose and resilience and holy wonder that exist in life. Act 1, we will pray. We will take time to greet one another and then listen to ancient stories that inspire and perturb us still. Act 2, we will pray, reflect some more about story and about how life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forwards. And then we will have some time for conversation and we will sing. Act 3, we will pray for one another and for this world, and we will bless one another and go forward with renewed purpose and hope. So I'm glad you're here on Zoom or here in the sanctuary, because what happens as we gather, as we tell stories and explore stories, as we're met by God's Spirit in this place, will be different because you're here, because you are a part of it.
We encounter examples of people whose stories evolve in unpredictable ways over the course of their life. As a result, the way they understand themselves and tell their story changes. How they are perceived by others changes too. An early example of this is the saga of Joseph, which unfolds in the course of 14 chapters in the book of Genesis. Joseph of the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat fame is the favorite son of the patriarch Jacob and his envious brothers sell him into slavery in Egypt. However, after interpreting the dreams of Pharaoh, he rises to second in command in Egypt and saves Egypt during a famine. When Jacob's family travels to Egypt to escape the famine, and his brothers are brought to him and recognize him, the tension is evident as their deceit catches up with them. Here's the story of that tension in Genesis chapter 45, 1-9. Joseph could no longer control himself in front of all his attendants, so he declared, "Everyone leave now." So no one stayed with him when he revealed his identity to his brothers. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians and Pharaoh's household heard him. Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm Joseph. Is my father really still alive?" His brothers couldn't respond because they were terrified before him. Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me." And they moved closer. He said, "I'm your brother, Joseph, the one you sold to Egypt. Now, don't be upset and don't be angry with yourselves that you sold me here. Actually, God sent me before you to save lives. We've already had 2 years of famine in the land, and there are 5 years left without planting or harvesting. God sent me before you to make sure you'd survive and to rescue your lives in this amazing way. You didn't send me here. It was God who made me a father to Pharaoh, master of his entire household and ruler of the whole land of Egypt. Hurry, go back to your father. Tell him this is what your son Joseph says." An aspect of Jesus' humanity was his own experience of how we grow and change, and the way that people's perceptions of us sometimes don't keep up with that reality. We see this when Jesus returns to Nazareth, his hometown. People who've known him since he was a kid are ready to be impressed by what he has made of himself. But when Jesus speaks from a place of having been called and tested, an intimate place with God, speaking God's truth, the childhood friends and neighbors turn against him violently. Here's how the story is told in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 4, 22-29. Everyone was raving about Jesus. So impressed were they by the gracious words flowing from his lips. They said, "This is Joseph's son, isn't it?" Then Jesus said to them, "Undoubtedly you will quote this saying to me, 'Doctor, heal yourself.' Do here in your hometown what we've heard you did in Capernaum." He said, "I assure you that no prophet is welcome in the prophet's hometown. And I can assure you that there were many widows in Israel during Elijah's time, when it didn't rain for 3.5 years, and there was a great food shortage in the land. Yet Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to a widow in the city of Zarephath in the region of Sidon. There were also many persons with skin diseases in Israel during the time of the prophet Elisha, but none of them were cleansed. Instead, Naaman the Syrian was cleansed." When they heard this, everyone in the synagogue was filled with anger. They rose up and ran him out of town. Later, following Jesus' death and resurrection, when he encounters his followers on the seashore, he specifically speaks to Peter. While Peter has left the experience of following Jesus behind him now and returned to fishing, Jesus anticipates where Peter's journey in life will unexpectedly take him, and that it's not something he can control or foresee. This is how it's told in John 21:18-19. Jesus said to Peter, "I assure you that when you were younger, you tied your own belt and walked around wherever you wanted. When you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will tie your belt and lead you where you don't want to go." He said this to Peter to show the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. After saying this, Jesus said to Peter, "Follow me." Finally, Paul, in one of his occasional moments of self-awareness and insight, writes about love as the aspect of life's meaning and depth that we need time to fully grow into and embody in how we live. It comes with maturity and growth. Listen to these beautiful words from the first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13, 8-13. Love never fails. For now we know in part, but when the perfect comes, what is partial will end. When I was a child, I used to speak like a child, reason like a child, think like a child. But now that I have become a man, I've put an end to childish things. Now we see a reflection in a mirror, then we will see face to face. Now I know partially, but then I will know completely in the same way that I have been completely known. Now faith, hope, and love remain, these three things, and the greatest of these is love. In these readings, we hear God's voice. God is still speaking. Thanks be to God.
With some words, when they're lyrics to songs, I find that I can't just read them without finding that I'm humming the tune in the back of my head. It seems like I've been here before. I can't remember when, but I got this funny feeling that I'll be back here once again. There's no straight lines make up my life, and all my roads have bends. There's no clear-cut beginnings, and so far no clear ends. All my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. All my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. The seasons spinning round again. The years keep rolling by. Harry Chapin's song from the 1970s is a way of expressing something that the 19th century Danish philosopher and theologian Søren Kierkegaard wrote about in one of his notebooks, that our understanding of events in life comes only after the fact, after we've experienced them. He wrote, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." So life at any given moment cannot really ever be fully understood, he continued. We're constantly moving forward in time. At no point do we get breathing space to pause and understand reality. It continuously unfolds before us. The present is a constant stream of becoming, that when we try to hold it in place with our clumsy descriptions and ideas and concepts, it slips through our fingers. The author, Nancy Reddy, whose book, The Good Mother Myth, was in 2024 a widely reviewed autobiography of a first-time mom. She set out to write about everything she was learning about maternal ambivalence and postpartum anxiety, and all her questions about mothering across time and cultures. And after a great deal of work, she came to an alarming realization. No matter how beautiful the language or moving the metaphors she wrote, no reader was going to stick with me for 80,000 words of lyrical weeping in the dark. I was writing about my own life, but I still had to find the plot. I was writing about my own life, but I still had to find the plot. I can't remember where I heard someone once say that life is like a jigsaw puzzle where we've lost the box. We don't know what the picture is that we're constructing as we're doing it. It doesn't matter how old we are, we all need stories. Stories to believe in. If there's no storyline, no integrating images that define who we are or that give our lives meaning and shape or direction, we just won't be settled, grounded. Stories set the inner life into motion. And this is particularly important when our inner life is uncertain or under pressure or feels trapped. The psychologist Carl Jung said that transformation only happens in the presence of story, myth, and image, not through rational arguments. We need story, he said, to harness the power to change our hearts and minds and enliven our imaginations. We tell stories because we've all survived something. We've all have discovered something. We all have been amazed at something. Stories are like signposts from the past that give us clues about the future. Our stories are a witness to our learning, our experiences of trauma, of healing, of celebration, and of survival. The philosopher of science, Thomas Kuhn, in his 1962 book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, introduced the term paradigm shift to our vocabulary. A paradigm is a set of stories and images and concepts that shape the way we think about things, our worldview. Thomas Kuhn held that paradigm change becomes necessary when a previous paradigm becomes so full of holes and patchwork fixes that a complete overhaul is necessary. The shift in thinking, which might have felt threatening at one time, now appears to be the only way forward and as a real lifeline, in fact. An example of a paradigm shift is the Copernican revolution, where people gradually, over a period of more than a century, learned to think not of everything circling the Earth as the center of the universe, but of the Earth and planets going around the sun. It was a dramatic shift in how we told the story of humanity. We were knocked off a pedestal. It wasn't all about us, after all. In fact, as we came to know, we're a speck on a small blue dot amid an ocean of galaxies. I think we're at one of these critical junctures again as faith communities today, as churches, a new reformation or something like it, a paradigm shift that's not yet come into focus, but that's taking shape and it's changing how we tell our story. There's a recent cartoon I saw, I think from the New Yorker, depicting a man and a woman talking about faith. The man says, "I believe, but sometimes I don't." And the woman responds, "That's weird, because I don't believe, but sometimes I do." In his 2021 book, Faith After Doubt, the progressive Christian author Brian McLaren has sought to understand some of the dynamic of our changing storylines by reflecting on human development, drawing on people who have sketched stages of childhood development, stages of faith, and so on. McLaren ends up with 4 stages of faith development. Stage 1 is simplicity, which sees God as the big person in the sky who sets rules, requires obedience, and mandates punishments when the rules are broken. Stage 2 is complexity, which allows for broader perspectives, open-mindedness, and mystery. Stage 3 is perplexity, a stretching, awkward kind of time, learning how to hold on to shades of gray and living with severe doubts, cynicism, and dark nights of the soul. And stage 4 is harmony, a stage of faith that is not about religious beliefs, but about the more excellent way of living a life of love. Now, I'm pretty sure that the people who walk in the doors of churches like this one today are everywhere along that spectrum, 1 through 4. And the people who sit next to us or who are joining us on Zoom are also all over those stages, which are not steps on a ladder, but a flow of human growth, and not all in one direction. We are at different stages and points in life as we reflect on our stories along a continuum. Richard Rohr's book, Falling Upward, A Spirituality for the Two Halves of Life, suggests that life can be divided into 2 distinct halves. In the first half of life, we focus on building our identity, establishing our place in the world, and creating what he calls a container of our lives. This phase is characterized by career growth and achievement. It's a time of graduating from school, forging a career path, building relationships, for some people starting a family. It's about solidifying your sense of yourself and who you are in the world. The second half of life is where spiritual depth begins to develop. It's about finding the meaningful human contents that the container was meant to hold, beyond career achievements and home ownership and a pension plan. Rohr points out this second phase is often triggered by some sort of falling experience, a failure, a loss, or a tragedy that throws our worldview, our paradigm, our story into disarray, into question. Rohr believes that this falling is necessary for spiritual growth. It's in experiencing our falling and coming to grips with our imperfections that we become fully human and find ourselves falling upwards. In falling upwards, our failures and struggles become stepping stones to a deeper, more authentic self and spirituality. In the second half of life, Rohr believes, we learn to let go of our carefully constructed identities and begin to discover our true, authentic self. The way we tell our story reflects a deepening of wisdom, greater awareness and compassion, and a more nuanced understanding of life that embraces even vulnerability. As I have eased into my own second half of life, Roar's approach has put down roots deep within me, within how I understand my own story. As I've said to some of you, my distinctly unusual path through ministry, involving academic, then international, then ecumenical, and eventually interim ministry, made little sense to me for the longest time. But arriving here to Bloor Street, I had a sense that it had all prepared me for this time. All the strands of my story have been coming together when I look back. We live our lives forward, but we understand them in reverse. In the saga of Joseph, events overtook the scheming, jealous, cruel brothers and forced them to come face to face with their actions. And in the person of the one who could rescue them from starvation. The story changed, and as Joseph himself says, I'm only here in this position of power because of what you did. Who knows where our actions lead? Who can imagine the outcomes as this story is happening? In Luke, Jesus has tremendous impact as he begins to teach and heal and brings a message of hope to people until he encounters his former neighbors in Nazareth. They don't just feel a deep resistance to his audacity, they want to kill him. The reaction when we defy the accepted storylines can be extreme, as when faith communities speak out and we're told to stay in our lane. Peter, disillusioned and discouraged after Jesus' crucifixion, returns to what he knows, to the story of his life as he'd always assumed he'd live it, and was living it again, fishing. But Jesus offers deep wisdom to Peter that you cannot know. You probably can't imagine where your story will take you. And you may not go all that willingly, frankly, but you will find yourself in Rome, center of the empire, unafraid and telling a story that will change the world. Joseph, Jesus, Peter. I'm not going to say that these line up tidily with simplicity, complexity, and perplexity. They don't. Not tidily, anyway. But Paul, of all people, does take us into harmony when he writes, "Now I know partly, but in time I will know completely and be completely known." Faith, hope, and love, and of these three, the best, the greatest is love, the harmony, that oneness that we can reach towards. How are we as Bloor Street, Trinity-St. Paul's, and St. Matthew's, not just listening to stories, to scripture, but telling our stories anew for such a time as this? And how are you, each one of you, retelling your own life story in ways that gradually begin to bring new meaning and fresh purpose? Stories. May it be so.